imagine the fear of being confined in Herod's prison. His father, Herod the Great, had terrorized the Bethlehem countryside when Jesus and presumably John were toddlers. Each Herod had Rome breathing down their necks, a decree to keep the peace or else. I can't imagine how that felt either, if I'm honest. I can't imagine how it feels right now as grim news reaches us of shootings in Rhode Island and Australia. I can't imagine John's disciples' confusion as they approached Jesus, turning their back to the crowds to disguise their mumbled message, to hide John's fear and doubt. But still, they ask, still John asks, even from prison, John leans towards hope. Fear constricts the heart and dulls the imagination. But faith, however small and limited it may seem at the time, by means of compassion, opens our hearts so joy may enter. Despite the mumbled question, Jesus seems to give an answer within the hearing of the crowds. Tell John what you see and hear, he says. But then instead of telling John or John's disciples or the crowds waiting with bated breath, instead of telling them who he is, he tells them who he cares for. The blind see, the lame walk, folks are cleansed, they hear again, the dead rise. The good news, it rings out everywhere, even where it was never expected or hoped for. Jesus' excitement fills the air, but I can still imagine the crowd's reaction, the kind of puzzled looks that they give him, hoping, like John, for some kind of clarity. Sensing they still have questions, Jesus continues, but once again, instead of telling the people about who he is, he tells them instead who John is. He says, come on, you know that there was something more about John. You didn't go out into the wilderness to look at the landscape. You didn't go out there for like a red carpet show. You went out there because you knew he was a prophet. And seriously, I tell you, not only that, but he's the one that Malachi wrote about, a messenger, a way preparer. And of course, this cleared everything up for everyone, and they all went away joyous and well-informed. Here's what I think Jesus is pointing at. When we think about John the Baptist preparing the way, I think we imagine him like rolling out the red carpet or preparing the parade route for Jesus. But that's not what the prophets meant. When Isaiah draws the image of the way, he's talking to, well, it's actually not clear who he's talking to. He's either talking to Israel the evening before Assyria conquers it, or he's talking to the people of Judah in their Babylonian exile. Isaiah covers a lot of time and a lot of ground, so much that scholars kind of talk about like a first Isaiah and a second Isaiah. But regardless of who Isaiah is actually talking to, he's speaking to people who are afraid. People who cannot imagine what the morning will look like. People who cannot imagine what home is like anymore. So when Isaiah talks about the way is a highway for the people, all the people. Not the parade route for the conquering general, it's the road home for everyone. It blossoms, it sings, it reverberates with laughter. The fearful, the traumatized hear a promise that says whatever has happened, whatever tomorrow holds, God is making a smooth, even path, a path to home, a path to joy. So when John asked Jesus if he is the one to come, when he asked out of fear, and of course he's afraid, his body is confined, his heart is closed, but when he asked, Jesus says, look around. It looks like old Isaiah's vision right here. John, you made the way. Look who I'm bringing to repaired, the restored, the resurrected. So much more than you can imagine. And it's okay to be afraid, because in the midst of fear, the on-ramp to the highway of God is compassion. And compassion opens our hearts so that joy may enter. In compassion, Jesus meets John in his fear and assures him that joy doesn't come in pretending like the bad things aren't happening. Joy comes from the compassion that is honest about suffering. In his conversation with the Dalai Lama about joy, Archbishop Desmond Tutu explains, if you're setting out to be joyful, you are not going to end up being joyful. You're going to find yourself turned in on yourself. It's like a flower. You open, you blossom really because of other people. And I think, Tutu says, some suffering, maybe even intense suffering, is a necessary ingredient for life, certainly for developing compassion. This is the time of year where we feel obliged to manufacture happiness. We got to put up the holiday decorations and get the gifts to give and go to the concerts and the school dress-up days and the shopping. But at some point in time, all of us are going to be exhausted and no more joyful than when we started. We got the news blaring in the background. We want to be happy, but we're fearful of the future. Fearful of our neighbor and fearful for our neighbor. All week, beloved, I tried to write something about joy that didn't sound like slap a smile on your face and get on with it. Because that's not joy, right? I don't know what that is, but it's not joy. And the reason I know it isn't joy is because there's no compassion in it. No compassion for others and no compassion for ourselves. In reflecting on Mary Oliver's poetry, Ross Gay said, joy is not what happens when we win the game-winning shot, but it is what happens when we are with each other in the midst of our sorrow, which is immense and ongoing and abiding. When the exiles take to the highway, there's no denying what has come before. The fear, the suffering, and the sorrow. They carry it with them. But there is this stubborn insistence that this joy, that this is God's way, that God is leading them, that God walks with them, walking with them through it. Joy in this way is an act of resistance, refusing to deny fear, meeting it always with honesty and with compassion. So, beloved, in these waning days of Advent, I invite you to the kind of joy that begins quietly, that begins in doubt and fear, and even in confusion and frustration. I invite you to the kind of joy that blossoms because it is honest about what is not right in the world, honest about what is not right in our lives. I invite you to the kind of joy that turns on compassion and finds its way in singing, in being opened to one another, in community, in the feast that has no ending.